Hello, everybody. Welcome to the November edition of the Eureka Whiskey Club virtual tasting. Really excited about our featured distillery this month, and lucky enough to be joined by two great people from Barrel Craft Spirits, which we'll dive into that in a moment. As always, thank you very much for being a member, and we just appreciate everybody that is a member, and we trying to bring you the best whiskey that the U.S. has to offer, and I think Barrel Craft is definitely among that conversation. So just to get a few things out of the way right away, we will have a great discussion today with Will and Stephanie, and then some Q&A at the end. As a reminder, we do have some prizes to give away as well. But we'll get to that in a second. First of all, again, welcome Will and Stephanie. I will allow you to introduce yourselves. If Stephanie, do you mind going first?
Not at all. Hi, everybody. My name is Stephanie Bear. I am a senior brand development manager for Barrel Craft Spirits. I'm based in Denver, Colorado, and I cover sales and market coordination for most of middle and western United States.
She has quite the lineup behind her as well, which I'm pretty jealous.
You got to show it off. If you've got it, flaunt it.
and Will, go ahead and introduce yourself to the group here.
I'm Will Schragus. I was the first employee of Barrel Craft Spirits. So Joe Beatrice, the owner and founder of the company, sort of did everything himself. And then in 2015, wrangled me away from Rum Clement, which I know we're going to talk about soon. And so I work with the sales team. I work very closely with Stephanie, and then I also work with the product development team on blending and sort of the imaginarium of our products. And at this point, it's a bit of a dream job for me. And so call me what you want and ask what you want, but I guess that's my job at the company.
Got it. So before we kind of dive right into this, thank you, Will and Stephanie, for providing some really cool prizes that we're going to be giving away later. As we've been doing for the past few months, we have two prizes tonight. The first prize being a signed bottle of Dovetail. And the second prize kind of is a swag bag, a Carhartt swag bag. So again, those are going to go to the best two questions of the night, and maybe we'll let Will pick one, and Steph, or we'll probably I'll ask you to collaborate, and you guys can pick your favorite one, and then second place as well. So that's really exciting. Just as a reminder, if you are watching this on YouTube and Facebook, and maybe the account you're signed into is not the name of the name associated with your membership, just go ahead and make sure you write the name associated with your membership before your question. But if you're logged into the account that's associated with your name, you don't have to do that at all. So now that we've gotten the boring stuff out of the way, let's talk all things Barrel Craft. So Will, Stephanie, I'm not sure which one of you, just kind of maybe Will being the first employee, this would be a better question for you. Can you just kind of give us a brief history of the brand and where it started, and kind of just pretend no one knows anything about Barrel Craft?
So Barrel Craft Spirits was founded in 2013 by Joe Beatrice, who still works in every department of the company, with the, vision that the American whiskey drinking world was not as blindly brand focused as a lot of the larger brands in the country assumed them to be. He wanted to give people an opportunity to taste new, interesting whiskeys all the time. And he, as someone who had worked in sort of internet solutions and marketing in a variety of industries, but one of which was the alcohol industry, had the experience in the 90s and early 2000s of tasting bourbon straight out of the barrel in Kentucky. And that was his favorite way to drink. And so he decided, I'm going to launch a company and a brand that focuses only on cask strength whiskeys. At that point, it was only bourbon, and is not at all concerned with consistency, is only concerned with exciting releases and quality. And so though Barrel Craft Spirits has evolved a lot since 2013. There's sort of two pillars that govern everything that we do. The first is that we do everything at cask strength, and the second is that we are concerned only with making the most exciting thing or the best thing we can at any moment, and we're not concerned with making the same thing. And that seems obvious when I say it out loud. And again, been with the company for a while, so my shtick seems very rehearsed. But I think what is wonderful about the simplicity of those two statements is, first of all, we live in the box of cask strength, and we've become really good at blending things at cask strength and tasting things and thinking about them as ingredients the way they exist. And secondly, that it is impossible to recreate the last thing and what's the best thing I can make at the same time. And there are very, very few alcohol, especially distilled alcohol producers, that are focusing on the latter instead of the former. And that allows us to bring exciting whiskeys to market pretty consistently, and allows us to be more creative about the things that we're doing, because we don't have to think long-term about them. We can think about, what do people want now? What are we able to make now?
So like on that note, so this release of Seagrass, well, I mean, is there going to be another release of Seagrass down the road that's going to be slightly different, or is, Seagrass not going to be made again, or so how does that work?
Seagrass is part of a line that we do, Dovetail, Armida, and Seagrass, where we always use the same 3 ingredients to blend them. Seagrass is a blend of Canadian and American rye. The Canadian rye is finished in apricot brandy casks. The 2 different American rye blends are finished in rum agricole or Martinique rum casks and Malmsey Madeira barrels. But we always blend those 3 ingredients to taste, not to proof and not to consistency. And so with each, what we call vatting of Seagrass, we want to keep the soul of that whiskey the same, but we want it to be the best expression of the thing that we're making at that moment. And so if you like Seagrass, you'll always like Seagrass. It will always have the same basic flavor profile. It's made out of the same 3 things. But much like a really good craft brewer, or I think even more akin to a really good winery that is trying to make the best expression of their vineyards that year, we're trying to make the best expression of the blend of those 3 ingredients each time that we've added. But we've added about twice a year.
The proof will vary as well, right? Obviously.
Yeah, the proof is always within a couple of percentage points, because we are sub-blending each of those ingredients to be something that is predictable. But Seagrass, to my knowledge, has never gone below 116 and never gone above about 120.
Stephanie, I don't know if I know Will was the first employee, but do you have anything to add as far as like what Barrel Craft is and kind of the ethos or the history of the brand?
Yeah, so I actually, Will says he's the first employee of the company outside of the family, which is true. Am I the next one after that? Before my hiatus?
Yeah, so Stephanie was the second salesperson on the payroll, right?
That makes sense, yeah.
Trip and Katie in production and design, but yeah, I mean, you tell the story.
Yeah, so I was a bartender at a large whiskey bar called American Whiskey in Manhattan, in New York City, and it's on 30th Street between 7th and 8th Avenue, so very close to Madison Square Garden, and it had a massive, massive whiskey collection. Lots of spirits, but primarily we focused on whiskey. And I worked there for several years, but that is actually how I met Will. Will was my, actually, Clement rep. He sold us rum agricole to the bar. And I met him when he was sitting at the bar one day on his first visit as a sales rep to us, and we developed a friendship. And over a period of however many months, he eventually recruited me to start doing some part-time work for Barrel Craft Spirits, doing in-store tastings similar to this, but in a liquor store, and staff trainings at various cocktail bars around the city at the time. And I worked for them for the better part of a year before I left to go to a couple other larger companies, and then found my way back about 2 years ago. But the reason I think that that's relevant and important is my take on the company is, I've been working in craft whiskey now for almost 10 years, and being behind the bar at that particular bar, which was really at the forefront of bringing not just craft whiskey, but craft whiskey cocktails in a massive international market in this country, we saw a lot of different trends happening across the whiskey sort of field. And the major things that we noticed were that people were increasingly becoming more and more educated about what they were drinking. They were really curious. They were asking lots of questions about production, aging, flavor profiles, how to taste correctly, how to drink correctly, that they hadn't been asking in the years prior. And so with a consumer who's more educated about the product overall and is specifically seeking out these points of information, you as a brand have to figure out how to train your people, but create a product that is going to be able to provide the answers to all of that to everybody who's asking, so that you can get them excited about what you're drinking, not just because it's new and exciting and interesting and premium, but because it's transparent and communicative, and it's almost like a partner brand to people who are looking to get into craft whiskey, which can be a really daunting, industry for a lot of people who aren't familiar with it. I'm not ashamed to say that when I got into craft whiskey, I was like really intimidated. There's so many, like, it was like wine. Like, there's so many brands, there's so many different styles, there's so many rules and regulations that go behind the different types and the ways to produce whiskey. And so to get involved in it is like a really serious undertaking. And Barrel has, from the start, 'cause I think we were one of the first bars to carry Barrel in New York. It's been a brand that's been really communicative and really transparent and really welcoming to all kinds of people who are looking to get involved, regardless of what level you're entering into the field at, which is really cool to see.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, just to hear your story from, I haven't been to that bar in New York. I need to get back to New York. It's been a few years since I've been, but just to hear the story from bartender of an amazing craft whiskey bar to now with Barrel Craft, that's awesome. Now, Will, we heard kind of Blair's background and how she got where she is today. Like you had she had mentioned, and you had mentioned earlier, that you were in the rum business before coming to Barrel Craft. Can you maybe talk about maybe what led you to the spirits industry in general?
Yeah, so it's funny, like, working with Stephanie so closely now at the same company, but seeing that we kind of came to it from very different places in the restaurant industry. I had no idea that I was going to work for a whiskey brand. My experience coming into Barrel Craft Spirits was outside of the category of whiskey, whereas I think, Stephanie, for pretty much your entire real career, you've been with brands that do whiskey specifically, although I know Fernet too. I started as a sommelier, and I worked in fine dining in New York, and though I really loved the product side of it, unlike Stephanie, who's a wonderful bartender, I was a terrible server. And I burned that really quickly. I think that
it's a special talent. It really is.
Yeah, and it's one that I really admire and am embarrassed to not have. I think there's a quality that a lot of people who work in hospitality have, where someone is having a bad time and they want to make them have a good time. And for better or for worse, if someone's having a bad time, I want to tell them to go screw themselves. And so
I can confirm this.
And so I burned out of it really quickly. I was working in New York. I was working, the 70-hour weeks that come with fine dining or bar world. And my family's in New York, and I didn't get to see people that I was friends with. And I wound up getting offered a job with an auction house and retail store in New York City, or just outside of New York City, to do what started as domestic wine, but then there was no spirits specialist or spirits buyer. And I was excited about it'll come out later in this interview, I'm sure. I'm a big fat nerd. And so I was just excited to dig into a different category. And that was 2013 or so, right when the Pappy craze really started happening and the Macallan Fine and Rare craze really started happening. And that first wave of craft distilleries, the Leopold brothers, the Balcones, the people, I mean, frankly, Tito's, the people that were breaking the mold on what spirits brands were starting to gain traction. And so being in a very big liquor store in an affluent part of New York, I got to meet all sorts of cool people because they would come in and present. And that's where I met Ben Jones from what was then called the House of Agricole and is now called Spirit Bomb. And I moved on from there to do what I thought was travel around the Northeast throwing Damoiseau tiki parties. And there was a shuffle in personnel at House of Agricole, and I wound up doing distribution management on the East Coast and Texas. And I learned that for better or for worse, what I don't have in my ability to make people happy in a restaurant, I do have in my ability to send passive-aggressive emails to distributors. And that was the beginning of my career in managing a brand. I had met Joe at Zacky's. Zacky's where
sounds like we're
in New York.
Kindred spirits, Will.
Yeah. Zacky's, the place that I worked in New York, was the second store in the country to bring in barrel bourbon when it launched, Barrel Bourbon Batch 1. And Joe, in a way that I still don't understand, from the very beginning said, "You're going to work for me one day." And it took about 2 years. It took a year of me working in retail, and then it took a year or so, a year and a half of me working for House of Agricole. But Joe then called me and said, we're in 6 states. We're ready to be a national company. Make up a title. I want you to come work for me. And as a person in your mid-20s who loves spirits, to have someone who does only fancy cask strength whiskey say, create a job and come do it is a thing you never expect.
Here's the key to the candy
it
store. It
doesn't
right?
feel like that long ago, but like it actually now, what's cool is, and I think Stephanie, you have this experience now too. A lot of the stories of the company are stories that I was in, and so it's been a wild ride. We've gone from 6 states to 48 states. We've gone from one SKU to 101 whiskey to 120 something whiskeys at a time. We export to a bunch of different countries now. We've won all of the awards and blind tastings, from the ones that are stupid to the ones that are actually really impressive, and everything in between. We make things that no one really ever imagined could exist. We partner with distilleries all over the world and wineries and other producers for barrels, for finishing things, that places that I really admire what they're doing. It's a very, very complicated, work-intensive kid in a candy shop, I think, for pretty much everyone who's on the team at Barrel. And here we are closing the year, and only have more exciting stuff coming next year.
That's awesome. You said something that kind of sparked my interest. You said, like, you guys are focused, or, take pride in creating things that, no one else is doing. Like, just really experimental when it comes to blending or finishing or what barrels you're sourcing. Like, where did that come from? Like, obviously it works and it's great. And I think, you see you kind of said it earlier, where maybe seeing what the craft brewing industry does and just trying new things. I mean, where did Joe's inspiration come from? Or, where does your inspiration come from when sourcing barrels or deciding, what blends to do, or, because, I mean, you guys are kind of pushing, you're not kind of, you guys are pushing the envelope in the whiskey category right now for the better, in my opinion, and really bringing things to the market that I'm happy to see and happy to see the experimentation.
Mm-hmm. I think what is important to remember and to think about when you look at our portfolio is the things that seem most close to generic now were actually equally as middle finger to the industry as when we launched them. And so when Joe started the company, Barrel Bourbon Batch 1, Barrel Bourbon Batch 2, the idea of having your core item be limited and cask strength was something that the powers that be told Joe that he was going to fail. We had a lot of distributors when I first started turned the brand down because they didn't believe in the business model. Now, for a lot of our distributors, we're one of the most important pieces of their high-end portfolio, because they were distributors like Pacific Edge, who we work with on the West Coast, where Eureka Burger's footprint is, who believed in the business model to begin with and have been a really great partner to us since, I think, 2015. That original product, or that original whiskey, is now the Barrel Bourbon Batch series. which seems like the simplest thing that we do. Similarly, the New Year bourbon, which comes out once a year, which is actually about to be released in 2016, when we launched the New Year bourbon as a celebration of still being a independently owned, creative, fun company for another year. It was the first time that anyone had ever admittedly put 2 different states of distillation on the back of a label in America.
Wow.
Now you look at Fistful out of William Grant, and the entire branding of that huge brand is based on that idea that we actually had to like figure out if it was compliant or not to put on a label in 2016. The Dovetail, the whiskey that we're giving away as one of our gifts, the reason that it is called Barrel Dovetail and not Barrel Whiskey Dovetail is because there are 2 different states of distillation of whiskey that are finished separately before they're blended. And the TTB didn't know how to deal with that. And so we gave it the name Dovetail so that we didn't have to convince someone that it was a whiskey, even though every ingredient of it is a whiskey. And that was something.
Does Dovetail not say whiskey on the label anywhere?
It does, but it says Barrel Dovetail in bigger type font than it says whiskey. It says it is now a category called whiskey finished in, which exists now, but did not exist when Dovetail was launched. All of those things were really exciting new things to release when it happened, but the world of whiskey has grown so much, has evolved so much in 6 years that we look at Seagrass now, which is an apricot brandy finish on one of the ingredients of a rye that involves 2 different countries. And that never would have been able to be something we could do had we not done Dovetail before that. And we would not have been able to do Dovetail had we not done the New Year bourbon before that. Every bourbon we make now is a blend of different states, but it's only because we did that as an experimental thing once. So now I look at probably the hottest subsector of American whiskey is whiskey with finishes on it, is port finished whiskey, is sherry finished whiskey. And our company offers, what are we at now, Stephanie? 57 different finishes on our private release whiskeys. And that is 57 different label registrations, 57 different Trip and Nick and Joe on the blending team really figuring out how things are going to work. Our way of looking at what we're going to do is find the things that are working really well, continue to do them better, and then figure out as best we can by answering questions in conversations like this, by talking to people in the field, by putting our heads together, like what's the next exciting thing in the American whiskey world, and trying to be the people who crack it first.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So you guys are the first whiskey to ever source from 2 different countries, and the TTB was thrown off by that.
2 different, more than one state, and we're definitely not the first people to do it. We're just the first people to tell people we're doing it. The general rule of the alcohol
the TTB's
industry,
head exploded, is what you're saying? Because
I don't want to make too many claims about it because it works and it's fine now. Yeah. But the general rule in the alcohol industry is if you can think of a thing that someone is doing, mostly in a shitty way, someone's already doing it. And so people were doing bottled in, and it was distilled in a lot of different states, and they just said the state that it was bottled in. No one, as far as I know, had said distilled in blank and blank and blank before. It had always been blend it and then just take the state that it was bottled in. And now that you see that a lot, there's a lot of multi-state blends going around.
Well, yeah, I think the consumer wants as much transparency as possible, especially with, as many enthusiasts as you have these days. And Will, I don't think you're a nerd. I don't like to use the word nerd because I feel like it sometimes has a negative
Oh, no,
connotation.
it's a badge of honor for me.
Yeah. I feel like being a nerd just means you're really passionate about something and you like it. So, so I want to talk more about Seagrass. So I guess on that topic, what are the states that this whiskey was sourced from, or is there too many to list, or is it even relevant?
No. So there's rye from Indiana, of course. It's the 95.5 mash bill out of MGP. There's also Kentucky rye and Tennessee rye in it. And then there's a good amount of 2 different distilleries from Canada in it as well.
Now, are you taking those 4 whiskeys that you source from Canada, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Like, how do you decide what's finished in the Martinique rum barrels, what's finished in the Madeira and apricot brandy barrels?
So,
or is it a blend that goes into each of them? Or I guess, how do you determine what whiskey that you source goes into what barrels?
So it's 3 different sub blends that are blended before they go into the finishing cask. So it's sort of like a marriage and then a finish and then a blend of those finishes. There isn't a cool answer to the American whiskey side of it, but the interesting answer is that Canadian rye, unlike American rye, does not need to be aged in virgin oak. And so you wind up with a lot less Lingen or oak congener in Canadian rye than you do. It's much more distillate forward. The Canadian rye is what goes into the apricot brandy. And to me, what makes Seagrass special is this moment in the mid palate where everything else in the whiskey sort of falls away, and you just for 1 second get this like zero gravity apricots moment. And then the fact that it's a rye whiskey kind of comes back. And that is done very deliberately by putting the whiskey that is most vulnerable to being dominated by a finish, one that is much more distillate forward, much more dainty, even though it's at high proof, which is the Canadian rye, into the apricot brandy finish. And so it's creating a ingredient there that is able to do that in the mid palate. And the virgin oak of American ryes covers nuance quite a bit more than Canadian ryes do. And so that one ingredient, that Canadian rye blend, goes into the apricot brandy. The other 2 rye blends have more to do with the proof going into the other 2 finishes, the Malmsey and the Malmsey Madeira and the rum agricole. There's not as cool a story to it. But we very deliberately blend to then do what we know will work well in the finish to make the ingredient to then make Seagrass.
Cool. I definitely want to talk more about the whiskey and kind of flavor profiles. And, I have my own thoughts and my notes here as well. But I do want to kind of highlight the fact of your partnership with the Ocean Foundation and, how that ties into Seagrass. Stephanie, I don't know if you can talk on that at all.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, seagrass, right? What is seagrass? So seagrass is it's a type of ocean grass that grows on the floor of ocean beds, and it's a very important ecosystem for marine life. It provides not just food, but also shelter for a really wide variation of different types of fish and other marine life and other, microbes that live in the ocean and that are all really well connected and important in creating these coastal ecosystems. And so as we're seeing kind of our planet morph into something almost unrecognizable because of the effects of climate change, we're seeing a lot of that impact happen in our oceans. And so I actually don't know why we named this particular whiskey Seagrass. Will can definitely speak to that, because I remember I started a company a little over 2 years ago, and I remember Will coming to me with this project and saying, I really want to name it Seagrass, but I don't think Joe's going to go for it. And I was like, I don't know what seagrass is. So why would you want to name it that? So Will can talk about that in a minute, but naming this whiskey Seagrass and then being able to partner with the Ocean Foundation, which is a conservation organization that works to maintain coastal ecosystems and combat the effects of climate change, which are, so incredibly drastic on our ocean and our coastal ecosystems, is, really important.
I think also in the past year or two, as a company, we have talked a lot internally about wanting to be a company that is still doing good in one way or another, while acknowledging the fact that when you get to the bottom of it, our job is selling whiskey, which does good things for people's days, but maybe not good things for the overall world in the way that some other industries do. In thinking about which causes we wanted to be behind and get involved with, Joe and his wife Janet, who was the head of marketing for the company, were really excited about thinking about things that were doing really serious good that might not get the attention of some other causes. And we had this whiskey called Seagrass, and the name was picked because even though not that many people know what seagrass is, it is evocative of sort of coastal imagery. And that's what we were trying to do with the whiskey. We wanted to be a coastal whiskey in that something you could drink looking out the window when it's raining and you're looking at the like brooding ocean, or it's a whiskey that you could drink in a tropical setting, because there's not a lot of whiskeys that do well in tropical drinks. And I'm so glad that you're using it in a sort of tiki inspired cocktail tonight. It really makes for exactly what we were trying to do with the whiskey. But we looked at Seagrass, and a couple of researchers got in touch with us before we had decided to do any sort of partnership, basically saying like, thank you for naming it this. This is a huge issue, that this like piece of agriculture that the entire world relies on is getting destroyed, and no one's really talking about it. Mm-hmm. And so it just took us a little while to figure out how we wanted to be involved, but this was our first foray into attaching a cause that we really believed in, and one that we think doesn't really get enough attention. And frankly, one that we felt like we could still have a very inclusive environment with our company. The whiskey drinking public in America is wonderfully diverse in its like political and social opinions. And whiskey is a uniter in the country in a way that there are not very many uniters. And we wanted to make sure that as we are doing things that we think are good, we are not doing things that are alienating people. And so trying to save no one even knows how important it is, but it is really important and dying part of the underwater ecosystem sort of checked all the boxes for us.
I will say too, though, like I remember when I was interviewing for this role with you, and we had a conversation about charitable partnerships. Mm-hmm. Because at the time I was working for a really large company, and I had worked for a few others in the past that had been really insistent on like spending money for the sake of spending money, and like doing events and finding partnerships just for the sake of them. And like what actually came out of them was less important. What was more important was just the visibility of getting your name involved in it. And we had a really honest conversation about, is this a company that is going to allow us to create these relationships and develop these partnerships, but like in a meaningful way, and, take the time to really develop them and look after them and find the right opportunities and make it be about not just the whiskey, but about the actual issue. And in the 2 short years that I've been with the company full time now, Joe has never turned down, you also, since I report directly to you, have never turned down my, request to get involved in any type of charity that I want to donate time or whiskey or money or my resources to, because it's important, I think, at a company of this size to be involved in your community. And that's not just the community that exists in Kentucky, but it's the community of the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate you saying that. I think also that this is
I think overall that's just really refreshing to hear in general. So thank you both.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
And I think what's exciting about the partnership with the Ocean Foundation is we wanted to make sure that it didn't come off as a sales gimmick. And so the money is donated. And what we do is we print enough sort of neckers, we call them, for the bottles, so that there is a dollar amount associated with each bottle, but we've already donated the money. It's not like we need people to buy it to get the money for the Ocean Foundation. What happens as the project gets bigger and bigger is each time we run out of neckers, we donate another set of money. And so we won't let ourselves print more than corresponds to the donations. And we're kind of waiting to see, is it something that people respond to or not, or do we need to like figure out how to get the message across better? But so far it's been sort of organic, but everyone seems to be excited about it. And we're actively looking for and talking about what partnerships we can do with some of our other whiskeys as well. That's
great. I do want to get into tasting the whiskey. So I'm assuming that both Will and Stephanie have a dram of Seagrass. I've been sipping on a little. I'm going to pour myself a little bit more here in my amazing barrel craft Glencairn glass that everyone got. As always, we have the info sheets. We'll make this cocktail here in a minute, and then some information on the whiskey and tasting notes. So like my flavor scales here go from, grain to oak, nutty to floral, spice to sweet. So this is actually kind of one of the first whiskeys I've given kind of a middle of the road score to when it comes to grain to oak. And I think, to me, that was just, there was such a beautiful balance between grain and oak, where I felt like not really one outshined the other. I got a lot of each. I did find the whiskey to be much more floral than nutty. And then I also found a really great balance between spice and sweet here. I know it's a rye, so that spice, typically with rye whiskeys, but I think all the finishing definitely helped balance out some of that spice, and a lot of like sweet fruit forward notes came through. Like my big thing, I definitely get the mid palate apricot that you're talking about, Will. Like this passion fruit lychee thing jumps out to me, and then also like that floral kind of rose hips just towards the end, like as it finishes, I really just like get a very floral finish. So that was kind of my take on the whiskey in a nutshell. And again, in the chat, we always encourage people to share their tasting notes with the group. I'll try to keep my eye on the chat, see if anything pops up that I'll mention. But I know everyone else in the chat really loves to see what everyone else in our club thought. But Will and Stephanie, I'll definitely would love for you to share your tasting notes on the whiskey as well.
Stephanie, you want to go first?
No, you go first, and then I'll follow.
Trevor, what stuck out to me about what you were saying is the lack of nuttiness in Seagrass. And I think what is a way that I like to approach picking apart tasting notes for whiskey is thinking about where they might have come from in the process of making that whiskey. And what is unique about barrel craft spirits, and a little bit counterintuitive, because even though our facility is a licensed distillery, we are not distilling anything. One would think that the conversations about where certain flavors come from are simpler when you're not distilling yourself. But in a lot of ways, they're more complicated because we are not doing one process to make this whiskey. We're relying on many, many different processes outside of our control before the barrels come into our control. And then viewing those barrels as ingredients to make something that is hopefully greater than the sum of their parts. When I think of nuttiness, which is like extremely relatable term, but also one that encompasses a lot of different flavors, there's a couple different things that make it up. There's the sweetness of oak flavor, which comes across as, to me, like often like walnuts or sort of raw edible nut flavor and smell. There's the oxidativeness of really old things. So the sort of like dusty peanut skin kind of nuttiness. And then there's malted barley, which to me is a really nutty flavor. And so I get a lot of nuttiness in young single malt too. If you think about the ingredients of this whiskey, even though there's some American rye in it that sees virgin oak, the old oxidative whiskey, the Canadian rye, sees that apricot brandy finish, which to me neutralizes what otherwise might be a sort of nutty oxidative note. And there's virtually no malted barley in this. And so all of the things that might give you nuttiness in a whiskey are either married with something that is more obviously fruity or tropical, or don't exist in this. And so even though any one of those ingredients at the very beginning might have had that nuttiness, it sort of blended out just in the process of making the whiskey. The reason we called it Seagrass and the impetus behind this was to make a whiskey that encompassed all of the different motifs of coastal imagery. Like I was saying, everything from like Canadian or Northeastern or Pacific Northwest, like looking at the scary ocean inside drinking whiskey. And then also the like, if you're at the beach but you like whiskey, what can you pour on the rocks and it doesn't feel out of place? And so we wanted there to be this tropical aspect of it, but we also wanted it to be a little bit difficult. We wanted it to be a rye or a cask strength whiskey that if it was neat, you would fight with it a little bit. That if you poured it on the rocks, it still had a little bit of a burn. We wanted to make, and thus, we used pretty high proof ingredients in it. 118, though not the highest proof thing we make, is like nothing to scoff at in terms of alcohol content. what I really love about the flavor profile of Seagrass is on the nose and on the front palate, it reads very much like a rye whiskey with the fruitiness of it, I guess, exaggerated or accentuated by the finishes. The mid palate, again, has that zero gravity moment that I love so much with apricot. But then after you notice the apricot, it comes back and it hits you with being a cask strength rye again at the end. And so the finish of the whiskey pulls you back into it being a whiskey, even though the mid palate of it, to me, takes you away from the category of whiskey for a second and puts you more into the like categoryless and or fruit brandy for a second. I got a little distracted, but I guess that's my answer about the flavor notes of it.
I was intrigued.
Well, I think no, go ahead, Trevor.
No, I was just Stephanie would love to hear your notes. I just wanted to call out one thing, that someone had put in the chat and I failed to mention. This is 118 proof whiskey, so if you do need to add a few drops of water or want to drink this over a large ice cube, the whiskey may open up a little bit, and you may be able to kind of dial in or zoom in on some of these flavor profiles. But
we find that Seagrass takes water and ice very well.
Very well.
There are certain whiskeys that lose their edge. They break with water and ice. I think a really good example to me would be Talisker, which is one of my favorite distilleries in the world. But the exciting things about Talisker just sort of becomes a scotch when you put it on the rocks, so you put water in it. Seagrass, I think, is a really good example of a whiskey that like you can't really break Seagrass. You could do like a 50-50 in a pint cup with water and it's still going to taste like Seagrass. And that's not by design, but it's a really cool part of it. And it's why it makes such a good cocktail ingredient.
Yeah, that was actually going to be the cocktail component thing was what I was going to talk about is one of my favorite things about Seagrass, just overall, first and foremost, is that this doesn't taste like a rye. And we get a lot of people who get excited about our brand for two reasons. Either one, because they're whiskey aficionados and they're, diehard, bourbon collectors, bourbon nerds, followers of the industry, and they get really excited about all of our new bourbon releases. Or because they are dragged along by somebody who's like that and they are their husbands or wives or friends, date for the evening at like a whiskey fest. And they're like, I don't know, I'm just here. I don't know anything about whiskey. I'm not a big whiskey fan. I don't really know what I want to try. Seagrass is the first thing. It used to be Dovetail. Now that we have Seagrass, Dovetail is still a great one for that. But Seagrass is now what I pour for those people because I'm like, I worked in a whiskey bar with 500 whiskeys for many, many years. And if you poured this for me and told me this was a rye, I don't think I would have believed you because of the way it presents on your palate. And so what I like about that is it recruits people who aren't interested in rye whiskey or don't think that they like whiskey into the category in a way that's like really hard to do. If you're going to try to recruit somebody who doesn't drink whiskey into a whiskey category, rye is not the liquid you would choose to do that with. You would probably, and certainly not a cask strength rye, right? You would probably try to choose bourbon, like an 80 proof bourbon, like vanilla, toffee, marzipan, caramel, oak. And so this is a really fun whiskey to do that with people. And then if you're going to take it a step further and somebody comes in and, you're doing an event, they ask you to put together a cocktail or you're behind the bar and somebody asks you to just make them a dealer's choice drink, or you're at home and you want something unique and different because you've been drinking the same thing all week. Seagrass lends itself to mixing really well because there are so many different flavor profiles that you can attack with it. If you want to go after the fruity aspect, it does really well in a lot of like classic sour variations like daisies or smashes or crustas. If you want to attack the more like spice forward part of it, you can stir it up and it works really well with like a stirred boozy if you're going to throw it in like a Vieux Carré or Remember the Maine or, a Boulevardier or something like that. But what it does, I think, the best is the dryness of the finish of Seagrass, which for me, the finish is so long, it's so dry, it's like really tannic after you get that initial apricot bomb. It works really well with like round, creamy, fatty ingredients. So again, to go back to the Mai Tai variation that you guys are putting with it, it does really well with coconut cream. It does well with orgeat. It does really well with any type of nut syrup, not just orgeat, but it does really nicely with the silkiness of egg whites. because the texture of those creamy liquids works really well with the dry finish to kind of bulk it up overall and really make it kind of encompass your whole palate.
That's great. Love all the notes. I think that's a perfect segue, Stephanie, into kind of me making this drink here. And, you know, for sake of time, because we do have a lot of questions to get to, while I make this cocktail, I'm not going to call out all the ingredients, but everyone should have the recipe card. This is kind of a take on a classic Trader Vic's recipe. So we're just using lime juice, a vanilla simple syrup, orgeat syrup, and then we're going to be using the Barrel Craft, and then the Clement Rum Blanc Agricole. And I think that while I'm making this drink, and Will, this is more of a question for you, I've always, you know, I think that a lot of whiskey drinkers, and I hate to this be a blanket statement because I'm sure there's many whiskey drinkers like me that also appreciate rum. Like, why do you think, you know, and this is maybe a segue for you to talk about barrel rum as well, or Stephanie to talk about barrel rum. But like, why do you think more whiskey drinkers haven't gotten more accustomed or dove into the rum world? Just because I feel like there's so much flavor profiles and just so much variety when it comes to rum that I think a lot of whiskey drinkers that haven't opened up that Pandora's box would really enjoy it. So kind of an open-ended question while I make this cocktail.
Stephanie, you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
I can go first. Yeah. I have a theory. I don't know if it's correct. But you know, the history of rum in America predates the history of bourbon. Rum existed centuries before bourbon did in the US as an imported product. And the production of molasses syrup was enormous in the US to make rum. I think what happened, aside from the inevitable split from king and country in the United States that led to us relying more on domestic products and less on imported products from the United Kingdom, is that whiskey has been premiumized. Premiumed. It's whatever that word is.
Premiumized, yeah.
Yeah, premiumized. Sure. Let's go with it. Sure. Whiskey's been premiumized for a lot longer than rum has with the advent of single malt Scotch and age statements. And so I think for a very long time, drinking single malt Scotch with a high age statement was considered sort of a pinnacle of status in our country, having the ability to find those expensive and rare and old whiskeys. And that didn't translate to the rum category in the same way. And so people were less excited about rum because it was seen to be not as premium, because it wasn't categorized in the same way as whiskey was. It's not that it wasn't as good, it's just that the marketing behind rum wasn't really there. What do you think, Will?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two related things that go on in the spirits world.
Sorry.
I'm going to let you shake, yeah. That I Stephanie, I think you spoke to also. I think the first is, it is irresponsible to discount the importance of the powers that be with loud voices and marketing dollars influence on what's popular in America. That consumers are smarter than anyone, including me and Stephanie, give anyone credit for, though we would hope we give people more credit than most whiskey brands do. But people still respond to the things that they see and the things that they're spoken to about. And in the whiskey world, a lot of the really wonderful distilleries of the world are owned by large, powerful companies. And so the interest of making how good whiskey is known exists with people who have the wherewithal and the ability to be loud about it. In the rum world, the companies with a lot of money and power tend to own the less interesting, less elevated brands. And the cool, interesting rums are more often independent and do not have the distribution networks and the marketing capacity and the on-the-ground know-how of educating over long periods of time in America. the way that things become popular worldwide, but especially in America, is you've got good boots on the ground people talking about it and making sure that companies like Eureka Burger, that good liquor stores, that good whiskey, rum, spirits bars, that good restaurants, places people go to taste new things, are aware of them and have access to the information and can share it, and there can be some word of mouth. And the really exciting rums of the world do not necessarily have the track record of doing that well. I think in a broader sense also, though none of us like to admit it, we all to some extent identify with the beverages that make us feel like they are ours, or that we identify with in our personalities. And whiskey as a category has sort of owned masculinity in America for the, greater part of the 20th century and now. And that makes it a really steep mountain to climb for any other category, trying to be the go-to in sort of a more generic or broad market way. And so even though rum has very much owned the I'm on vacation and I want a cocktail world, the idea of identifying with a brand as who you are personally, I don't know of very many rum brands that someone could say, I'm a blank person, and feel good about it and it be a rum brand. And there are a lot of whiskey brands that are, I'm a Maker's Mark person, I'm a Jack Daniels person, I'm a Johnny Walker person. All of those, I'm a Jim Beam person, I'm a Blanton's person. Even though there's newer brands that are doing it, whiskey has owned that ability to do that in American culture for a really long time. And it's really hard to break into that for almost any other category. I would say the two brands that have done it best that aren't whiskey in the past 20 years or so are Grey Goose and Tito's, that they've made people, instead of just being vodka drinkers, be Grey Goose drinkers, or more recently Tito's drinkers. I haven't seen a rum be able to do that so well. Right now, I think Foursquare is doing a really good job of, they make amazing rum, and people who like Foursquare really identify with both the distillery and the brand of Foursquare. And we actually use some of their rum from Barbados in some of our blends as well. But we've seen a lot of failures too. I look at like the Facundo series from Bacardi that was really trying to be an identity rum outside of the Bacardi portfolio, and ultimately it just became expensive Bacardi. That it was, I have no idea if that's considered a success or not for the Bacardi company, but it was a little bit of a failure in identity creation. And part of that, I think, is that the power of whiskey identity in America is so strong.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with a lot of what you said. I'm a Dr. Bird person. That's my kind of favorite overproof Jamaican rum. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to talk about that because obviously the cocktail we're making tonight is a take on a traditional Mai Tai. So hopefully some people on the chat were able to make it. If not, you can make it in the future. And again, this isn't going to be your pineapple juice, orange juice Mai Tai that's been this is kind of the traditional Trader Vic's recipe with a little bit of spin using the seagrass here and a little bit of the rum agricole. We do have to jump here into questions from the group because I know everyone's champing at the bit for that. But again, thank you very much for the conversation, and really enjoyed learning more about Barrelcraft. And definitely want to get to our subscribers' questions here. So just kicking it off, Michael Osur asks, clearly it seems your market is not the average drinker. Who do you think your target market is? A question that no brand wants to answer.
No, I have no problem answering that. I think the average drinker is every brand's target market, because when you have and I hate saying average drinker, but it's the not casual as in drinking casually, but the not trying to make a hobby out of what they're drinking customer. When you start being recognized by those people, that is when you have really, really made it as a national brand. And so our goal is having broad market acknowledgement of us as being the most exciting blenders and bottlers of whiskey in the country. In order to get that there, our goal is delivering on all of the promises and over delivering for the price with the people who love to talk about whiskey. Because if we have them understanding how much labor goes into making our whiskeys what they are the people who are going to help us get to the quote unquote average drinker. But I also feel like I would love to give a Dovetail or a Seagrass to every person who says I'm just an average drinker, and say like, this is available, and like try this next to anything else that you're not excited about.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I saw in the groups that I lurk on to see what people think of our releases is that everyone was like, I wanted to try this, and I'm so glad you kind of forced my hand to do so. Mm-hmm. And I've just seen overwhelmingly positive feedback. So I'm glad that through this club, we've been able to get the bottle into people's hands that maybe were on the fence or thought, hey, this is something I might like, but I don't know if I want to invest the money in it because it's a premium brand. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that I was really happy to see. So,
and I think that we talk about this a lot as a company, the importance of being excited about being on whatever level the person you're talking to is on in terms of whiskey. Seagrass is a $90 bottle of whiskey. It is not one that we want anyone to jump into without confidence that it's going to be worth the money. $90 is a lot of money. What we want people to understand is our goal is being by far the safest bet if you are excited about spending $90 on a bottle of whiskey. It's not convincing someone who doesn't want to spend $90 to spend $90. And so even though our whiskeys are very varied, it is the same level of obsessiveness about quality for the price that is going into everything that's getting into the bottle for us. And so our target is, to answer this question again, I guess, is our target is more and more people who are walking into a store ready to spend $90, knowing that we are the safest way to do it. But in order to get there, it's the people who tell them. And that's usually the whiskey nerds like me or Stephanie, although Stephanie's cooler than
I am. So we're coming up here on an hour. So obviously we're going to go over here a little bit, and hopefully it will, Stephanie, that's okay with you.
Yeah.
I do want to get to more of these questions. So maybe if we can, Will, not that I don't love your responses, but I want to get it to as many as possible.
Let's rapid fire them. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's try to get them in like.
I'm used to getting kicked under the table for being too
30 seconds or less, because I want to make sure we can ask as many as possible and choose the one we like the best. So Clark White says, Will and Stephanie, with both of you having an involvement in marketing, how do you market your unique whiskeys to appeal to the typical bourbon enthusiasts? I think we kind of answered this, but Stephanie, I'll kind of toss that to you if you want to elaborate at all.
Sure. Well, I think the typical bourbon enthusiast has evolved over the past decade or so. I think the typical bourbon enthusiast 10, 15, 20 years ago was somebody who was looking for a consistent premium brand that they were comfortable with knowing was always going to be good and putting on their shelf. And now what the market is really looking for is something that's consistently innovating and unique. Everybody's always chasing the next new, bright, shiny, cool thing. And what our company does is provides that for people with our bourbon batches.
Awesome.
Was that good? Was that fast enough?
Yeah, no, you're good. Thank you. Will, this is directed to you. Have there been any blends that you have tried that didn't make it to release, but that you loved? He says, this is Peter Carabinis. He says, I'm a huge Dovetail and Seagrass fan. So have there been any blends that you have tried just that didn't make the cut, but you really liked? Or
there's some things that we have been working on or are working on or have worked on that are still in the works, but they haven't fit into a somewhat concise, what we call product matrix. And so they're concepts that are waiting for a go-to-market strategy. We also have a couple of things that are really interesting that we end up using as ingredients rather than final, I guess, products themselves. I think one really good example of that would be old Tennessee bourbons that are extremely low proof that get used as ingredients in a lot of our whiskeys that are really fascinating to taste. But once you let it out into the world as a 97 proof cask strength, people start to ask a lot of questions. And so we end up using those as ingredients blended with other things more than we do by themselves. If you look really hard, there's a couple of single barrels from a few years ago that came out under 100 proof, and they're some of the most interesting things we've ever put out. But actually, they were very difficult to talk about in the market because we just kept getting the question about people would say there's no way it's cask strength, and we were like, listen, like that it is. What do you want from us?
Mm-hmm.
I would have a lot of questions about that too. That sounds very interesting. I've
so
never seen anything that's cask strength.
And again, I don't want to take up too much time, but if you wanted me to take up lots of time, we'd have a conversation about water solubility versus ethanol solubility and flavor congeners, and that is where those things get really interesting.
Well, maybe down the road we can have you back on and we'll talk about that. Yeah. This is kind of just a personal question. Jesse Govea. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing anybody's name here. Outside of your own portfolio, what are some of your favorite whiskeys to drink at home?
This is usually where I revert to the shelf behind me because I've got other spirits that are hidden by my body. I try to make the barrel front and center, but my favorite ones are missing at the moment because I finished them and I need to go.
That's always the case.
I've got to go buy more.
That's why I don't have any barrel craft on my shelf. Honestly, I drank all of it.
Yeah, it's tough. I have to say, honestly, I have a very strong attachment to wild turkey.
Yes.
I know that's not a sexy answer for a lot of people, but
no, we did a wild turkey feature 2 months ago.
Wait, was Benny on?
Yeah.
He's one of my favorite speakers in the whole industry.
I adore wild turkey. I think that they have made a consistent product for so long. They've done a really good job of taking a brand that was not considered really high end and developing different tiers of it over the past couple of years to create Russell's Reserve and American Spirit and whatever, all the other, it's escaping me right now, but all the other, levels that they've done. And they've never made something that I don't like. Pound for pound, their Russell's Reserve 6-year is one of my favorite things that I have ever had. And I will buy that bottle time and time again. Time and time again. Plus the Russells are just so nice. I love them. I want to support them. Yeah. They're great.
Will, how about you? Can't take Stephanie's answer. Sorry, taken.
So it really depends on am I drinking for interest or drinking because I had a tough day? Yeah. My sort of dirty professional secret is that I drink mostly wine or cheap beer in my private life. And part of it is that I'm not good at turning my brain off of really thinking about it when I'm drinking whiskey. And so I wind up working every time I'm drinking whiskey. But I'll say this because Stephanie's here too. My probably single favorite whiskey outside of our brand, both for emotional and also because I love it reasons, is Balvenie 30. And I don't own a bottle, though one day if anyone wants to buy me a $1,000 gift, they can get one for me. But I was able to taste it at the Balvenie distillery, and it was a little bit of a okay, now I know what real $1,000 whiskey tastes like when it happened. And to me, there's certain spirits that give you aha moments. And there's a couple whiskeys, and I could go on about them, but that memory of being at Balvenie and tasting that is inspiration to me working on the product development team to want to give people that experience with our whiskeys of oh my God, I didn't know whiskey could be at this level. And so for that, I love it.
Yeah, I mean, experience always adds a lot to, preference in my experience.
Can we just point out quickly, Balvenie 30, wild turkey 6-year.
So Stephanie has the bottle you're looking for.
Different people.
Yeah.
Oh no, he's over
thought
here.
you were
I was pointing at him.
Oh.
Sorry, that probably wasn't obvious.
On
to
my
everybody.
screen, you're pointing at me.
Yeah.
I thought you were pointing at
Oh.
yourself. I'm like,
No,
wow, you have that bottle.
I was like,
and
Will's
Will doesn't
favorite
know.
is very fancy, and mine is very pedestrian.
I probably if I were to choose mine, I'd have to say I not to piggyback on you, Stephanie, but I'd probably jump on the wild turkey train.
Yeah.
To be quite honest with you.
Turkey 101 rye is another.
Oh yeah,
is up there for me.
Good staple just to always have.
My roommate from college and I, when we haven't seen each other for a long time, go hunting, which means drinking turkey rye and playing buck hunter at a bar somewhere. That's like our friendship catch up.
Getting to a few more of these questions here. One question for me. I'm sorry, this is not going to count for the question, but I just wanted to address it. Trying to figure out who asked this. Sean Branham asked, "One of these whiskey box bottles be available at the restaurant location sometime?" Well, yes, they may be in the near future, and we're working with the Barrel team and trying to get some of these bottles on our shelves. We kind of wanted to make this an exclusive release to our club members first, but probably sometime early next year you can look to see some Barrel whiskeys at Eureka, and then some previous releases over the past few months should be available to order by the pour at our restaurant sometime soon as well. Want to get to a few more of these in the next 10 minutes or so, but Danielle Williams asked, what is the craziest ingredient the company has experimented with or unique ingredient that you've added?
Stephanie, what do you think the craziest finish we do is? There's 5 or 6 that are wildest.
Well, it's actually really funny because the craziest ingredient that I think we've experimented with is Irish whiskey, and that
or Polish whiskey.
Yeah, Polish rye. That's a really good one.
Yeah.
Whenever I brought up Barrel Rye Batch 3 and told people that it was a blend of ryes from Canada, the US, and Poland, every single person was just like, I'm sorry, what? What are you talking about? And I was like, yeah, it's a thing. They make rye in Poland. It's delicious.
100%
it's really
malted.
good.
It's a single malt
100%
from
malted
Poland,
rye.
but it's made out of rye.
Yeah, so I think liquid wise definitely, but cask finish wise in the private release program, I think the most unique one that we've done is probably, aside from some of the vintner specific wine cask finishes, I would actually probably say rum agricole. Because I know rum finished whiskey has been around for a long time, but rum agricole finished whiskey hasn't. And that is not a liquid that I would have thought would impart enough complexity of flavor to such an aggressive spirit as a whiskey, a cask strength whiskey, that it would work. But it does. Hence, see here, Seagrass. But I'm also referring to some of our private releases.
Cool.
Couple more here. Kevin Bird asks, can you give us an idea of the scale you use to find the right blend? Also, do you use smaller casks to explore different finishes, and do you find the scale translate well to production level?
So we very rarely have used any cask smaller than the standard 53-gallon bourbon cask. Some of the wine barrels and some of the other spirit barrels are larger. Off the top of my head, the only smaller barrels we've really done in any sort of, and it wasn't a lot, but there were a couple of them, were the original St. Agrestis finished barrels were smaller, and the Never Sink apricot or Never Sink apple brandy was a half barrel, but there was literally only one of those. And that was an apple brandy finish we did, 3 years ago or so. But almost everything is larger barrels. In terms of the scale of the blending, we do things first at a pretty small scale, like a 200 to 500 milliliter scale using like a pipette. But the 200 milliliters to 5 gallons step up is one of the hardest parts of the blending process, because the sort of pervasiveness of different flavors are not linear. There's certain things that one drop affects it a lot in 200 milliliters, and sometimes that same one drop affects it in 5 gallons, but sometimes you need a much higher percentage in 5 gallons. And that gives us at least 2 data points to start thinking about scaling up even further. The final proportions at a 53 gallon or a 6,000 gallon level are never close to what they were at 200 milliliters or 5 gallons or whatever it is. But the lab work ends at about 5 gallons.
Awesome. So this is another question from Jesse Govea. How do you determine which barrels go into your single barrel programs versus a batch release?
Or do you want to use the farmer's market tomato analogy?
I can. I mean,
Sounds
the real answer to that is there's a lot of different ways that decision is made, and there's certain barrels that are sourced that even though we'll give them the sniff test, we source them to be part of the single barrel program because we know the sourcing and we know the age statement and we know that they're going to be good. But then there's a lot of barrels that are literally like pulled off the line because they're intriguing right before they're dumped that should have gone into a batch and wind up in the single barrel program. The analogy Stephanie's talking about is I really love to cook Italian food. So does Joe. And thinking about going to the farmer's market and buying tomatoes, the most beautiful heirloom tomato is one that you probably want by itself, maybe with like a little salt or with some mozzarella. To us, that's the single barrel. It doesn't mean that heirloom tomato would be good in a tomato sauce. It usually is too sweet. If you try to make tomato sauce out of heirloom tomatoes, you wind up with this like kind of awkward sauce. And it's because tomato sauce is a savory umami sort of flavor profile. It's the simple tomatoes. It's the like beat up tomatoes. It's the canned tomatoes. It's the tomato paste that make for really good marinara sauce. And so when we're looking at barrels, we are looking at them as ingredients or we're looking at them as finished products. And the two, sometimes one barrel could be both of those. But usually it's the sorting of, is this thing good by itself or is this thing going to serve a really important purpose in a blend? Barrels that are way out of balance often make better ingredients than barrels that are in balance because they bring something to a blend that changes it rather than, just acts as filler.
Awesome. All right, I have one last question for you, then we're going to determine a couple winners here. Shane... I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher your last name. Shane Berthiamu. Sorry, probably, didn't pronounce that correctly. I apologize. Are there any new and innovative whiskeys that we can expect in the near future? Ones that I guess you're allowed to share with us, that is.
So we just released our Gray Label whiskey, which is a 24-year-old whiskey. It was distilled in Canada, but it was aged in Canada and then America. It's 2 different lots of barrels. One is finished in Oloroso Sherry and one is finished in XO Armagnac. And then they're blended together. That's a really cool whiskey that just got released. Under our other brand or our partner brand, or, it's all of us, but it's us wearing a different costume, Stellum Spirits. There's the first ever sort of fancy limited release from Stellum that we call Stellum Black. There's both a Stellum Black Bourbon and a Stellum Black Rye, which is older, rarer, more interesting barrels used to enhance or bring new dimension into the core Stellum range. There's a very small amount of Stellum Bourbon, very small amount of Stellum Rye that's just hitting the markets right now. There's also a couple of sort of other little blends of Stellum popping around. If people care to look for one called Stellum Tara that is available in a few places too. I would say though that the Stellum Blacks would probably be the thing to look for. We did a blind taste in Kentucky last week where people put out, I think it was like 36 different bourbons, both ingredients and finished products that we had made without telling anyone else in the distillery what they were. And 2 people picked Stellum Black, and there was all of our fanciest barrels were there too. 2 people picked Stellan Black as their favorite thing on the table, which is pretty wild out of like 7 of us that did it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Will and Stephanie, we're coming up here on an hour 15, so I want to definitely choose some winners here. And just to quickly roll through the questions, we had Michael Osur, who asked what kind of your target market was. I'm not going to say all the names here because I don't want to struggle through anymore. Sorry. We had the question about have there been any blends that you tried that didn't make the release? Had the question about involvement in marketing. How do you market your unique whiskeys to appeal to the typical bourbon enthusiasts? We had what is your favorite whiskey to drink at home? We had what's the craziest ingredient that you've experimented with or unique added? We had what's for the future, which we just asked. We had the scale you use to find the right blend, and then how do you determine which barrels to use for single barrel programs versus batched? So I don't know if you can't privately, consult with each other, but let's start with the swag bag. What was your guys' second favorite question? Can you come to a consensus?
Oh no. Okay. Well, I really liked the question about what is the craziest ingredient the company has experimented with.
How about we do this, Trevor? Stephanie and I will each pick one, and you pick who's first and who's second.
Okay. Oh.
Okay.
So you're putting the pressure on me. Okay.
Yeah. You can be the bad guy.
I will be the bad guy. Sorry to our subscribers. Go ahead, Stephanie. You said your favorite was the most unique ingredient?
Yeah. What's the craziest ingredient the company has experimented with or a unique ingredient that you've added? I like that one.
I'm trying to figure out who asked that question.
Danielle Williams.
Danielle Williams. Okay. All right. And then, Will, I'll let you.
I would say I am most intrigued by the question about the scale of blending. Because that is not one that I get very often, and it is something that is a big challenge for us, and it's something that we've had to learn how to predict. With it doesn't look the way that it should. It's not logical, even though it is somewhat predictable once you understand the pervasiveness of different ingredients, and so that would probably be my favorite question.
Awesome. All right, now I have to be the bad guy here, huh?
Should I say why I liked my question? Should I
go ahead.
An argument for it? I feel like I didn't give Danielle enough justice here. Yeah. So my argument for this question is we do a lot of these. We obviously have a lot of really unique, interesting ingredients. And I have never had anybody ask me that before, not once. And I think it's an interesting question because it gives us the opportunity to focus on something that we do that's really out there and really, really different, and talk about possibly what things that we've done that we were really excited by because we thought it was really unique and crazy and interesting, but maybe didn't work. And that's always I think it's always fun as a company to focus on the things that we've tried that we do really well with, and the things that we've tried that the market maybe wasn't ready for or didn't accept, that we're going to take back to the drawing board and maybe you'll see come in something else. I like the question for that reason.
Also, for what it's worth, Trevor, I feel like these two gifts are like both kind of cool.
Yeah, they're both really cool.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like there's definitely not a loser here.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that Stephanie, I think she persuaded me with her explanation. And so I'm happy to announce that Danielle Williams, you'll be getting a solid dovetail. And I think it's Kevin Bird. You'll be getting a swag bag from Barrel. So we will be reaching out to you for some addresses and to get those sent out. But Will, Stephanie, greatly enjoyed our conversation this evening. Thank you for your time. We're super excited to feature the Seagrass in this pick, and look forward to doing some more stuff with you guys in the future.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having us. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.